Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Diluvian Delusion. As always, we just sit here, open the Word, unprepared, other than praying up. We definitely pray up, ask for the Holy Spirit's guidance. And I like to just walk through the steps in the video. First thing I do is press record, then I begin to prepare, just like anyone can. Just pick up this dusty Bible from the shelf, just open it and familiarize yourself with where you were last or where you want to go. We happen to have been in Genesis, centering around chapter 6, the origin of the Noah story. We read parts of chapter 5. We read a lot of chapter 6 on through the end. Yes, we finished chapter 6, verse 22, with "Thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him. So he did." It's a great place to start today with the conclusion of chapter 6. As always on the Diluvian Delusion, we like to discuss all types of topics, especially those affecting us today. You will find that the Bible, in my opinion, happens to be one of the best sources for that. So I typically read out of the Bible, but we try to study everything. What you can't see off the camera is a bookshelf over there with an Idiot's Guide to Buddhism and an Idiot's Guide to Hinduism and the mythology of the Egyptian gods, which I used to teach the kids, and the origin of the Norse deities, which I used to teach the kids growing up. Always to get a rounded off picture, to understand the contrast, to understand the full story of why we're here, where we came from, where we're going. And again, the Bible, in my opinion, happens to be the best litmus test for those other books. For the book of Taoism, for instance, one that I've enjoyed studying in high school. We luckily had a history and English teacher that got a bad rap because she was tough back then, but in hindsight, she taught us all kinds of stuff that we would not have probably learned elsewhere at that young age, 16, 17, really reading the Iliad and the Odyssey in the same consecutive months within the same one semester, where you're also reading the Aeneid and you're reading Beowulf, and then the next semester you're taking the entire Divine Comedy, the Dante's Inferno, Purgatory, Paradise, which I love that too. Learning the what we call the definition of the epic novel, the epic story, the epic narrative, and what we see reminiscent in Hollywood today, in pop culture, which I very much like to study. I love film. I love science fiction. I love all types of science fiction. Mario is a type of science fiction, in my opinion. And I very much enjoy these epic novels and these epic narratives and epic poems in the case of Dante. And in doing so, ironically enough, it eventually became part of my reestablishing of faith when I recommitted myself to Christ, as they say, at 27. That appreciation of all that literature stuff. Again, I wasn't a very good student, don't infer that, but I did like the stories. I wasn't even a very good reader, slightly dyslexic, I think, still to this day. I have trouble reading them, but I love the stories of Odysseus and love the stories of Beowulf and Dante. And so when I recommitted myself to Christ and started diving back into this book that I had a lot of education on as a young person, especially through my parents, but I didn't really appreciate, even up to 27 years of age. And as I dove back into it that summer, it was around August, around the time I was turning 28, I guess. Maybe turning 27, I don't know. But diving back into this word that everybody's so afraid of, I was even a bit afraid of it, thinking, oh, that's a elevated literature there, and it kind of is. But in reading it, I realized it's an epic novel. It's the origin of the epic narrative. It wasn't Dante Alighieri, which I love. Still love that. And I don't know that folks would say he was even the origin of the epic novel, but that's where I learned the term. And those epics are so amazing because they emulate this. In my opinion, I know that was a long way to say, the epics that I love so much, the Star Wars, the Conan, Dungeons and Dragons, which are narratives you create yourself. On the back wall, you can't see is Marvel and DC. All these narratives that are so epic. And I like them very much. I appreciate them. I believe they are so awesome because they emulate the myth that happens to be true, as C.S. Lewis and Tolkien reminded each other. One reminded the other. This epic novel is awesome. There's a whole other chain of videos I did years ago on Facebook Live. I called this Biblical Star Wars. That was the name of the change of videos. We were reading Judges and focusing on the Nephilim, which you've heard me say before. You'll hear me say again. And the topic very much intrigues me. The Nephilim and these cosmic battles between the fallen ones and the daughters of man and all these interactions. It's like a reminiscent of what Lucas portrayed in that narrative. Lucas wrote his own narrative, but we are all human. We all have a spark of truth within us. We're born with that reality and yet born into a sin nature. So it's difficult to navigate that. It's difficult to figure out which one is true. And to come back to the point, this is the litmus test. This is the truth gauger, if that's a term. I just coined it, if not. So let's dive into Genesis chapter 7, verse 1. We begin studying the book of Noah. And God just concluded Noah did what he was instructed. So, verse 7, Then the Lord said to Noah, my eyes, that light is a bit bright. I put it over bright tonight, apparently. Then the Lord said to Noah, Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. You shall take with you of every clean animal by sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and female. So that's interesting. We had covered the concept earlier, pointing out that he took 4 pairs of humans, seeming to highlight an importance to them, bringing 1 pair of everything else. But in chapter 7, I'm reminded of something. Again, this is a great example to others watching. We make mistakes even while we're reading, and going back and fixing them and using the text as its own litmus test is a great way to proof yourself. So it appears that there were a type of animals, not to use the genus, kind, species. There was a group of animals that the Lord deemed clean versus all the other ones. And of those, Noah was asked to bring 7 pairs of. Now, we definitely have heard the significance of 7. 7 is reiterated many times in the Holy Scripture as a holy number, just like 3. And Satan loves to counterfeit stuff. That's why his number would be a 6 or 3 sixes and so on. That's kind of a deep literary device there. But 7 is repeated many times. It's a holy number. Same with 3. Same with couple. Same with pair. Christ and his bride. These images, these numbers are very significant, and the Lord himself says that they are significant and have a real effect in the physical world. And so, again, we see another faith branching off from that called numerology. I believe it's called. Maybe not numerology, that's the study of numbers. But I believe there's a faith centered around deifying the numbers and their spiritual significance. Again, the caveat I'll add that is, in my opinion, taking it too far. That's worshiping the creation and not the creator, just like naturalism would be, or secularism, these things. But numerism, numerology, whatever the faith is called. I don't want to offend anyone by not knowing it. I want to respect that faith because I believe the origin of it was true. The Lord says there are significance in numbers, but if someone takes it so far as to worship the numbers, being the creation rather than the creator, in my humble opinion, that is going off the path. That is a sin. That is missing the mark, so to speak. That wouldn't be right, wouldn't be righteous, as we were talking about in other videos. So verse 3, also of the birds of the sky by sevens, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of the earth. So he's designated, he's taken seven pairs of this group because they're clean, and then you take just one pair of the other animals, inferring they're not clean, not necessarily dirty, but they're not the clean, sanctified animals. Then he reiterates in verse 3, also take 7 of the birds of the sky. He doesn't necessarily call them clean here, but that would put them in the group of the clean animals. But he's also distinguishing them too, by inferring that they weren't in the first group of the clean animals. He says, but also the birds. So that's something interesting to dive into later. Verse 4, for after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth. There you go, 7 again, 7. 40 days and 40 nights, and I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. You can tell what a bad reader I am. Let that encourage all my brothers and sisters out there. But back to the point. Numbers, that wasn't really the point, but that's where we've gone here. We see 40 again, 40 days, 40 nights. Later we see 40 years in the desert, 40 years of Moses' people wandering the desert. Then we see 40 days in the desert with Christ being tempted by the devil. We see these numbers. That is significant. That is not to be shied away from. We got to pay attention to that. To go on a bit of a tangent, don't let distracted faiths, as I would call them, such as the worship of numbers, and another one I think of is naturalism. Don't let that fear of noticing that that's a missing of the mark, don't let that shy you away from respecting and loving the nature and respecting and loving the numbers under the understanding that they're the created by the Creator. The Lord wants us to. I believe He says multiple times in His instruction manual to have nature point you to me. Nature is meant to be loved and to be awed after, with a reverence. Understanding that the ultimate reverence, what we would call worship, is reserved for the Creator of that incredible, awe-stricken nature. So let the nature be appreciated, love it, be in awe of it, have a reverence for it. Same with numbers. Have a love for it, have a appreciation of it, have a recognition of it throughout your life and throughout text and throughout reality in this life. There are numeral significance. So just because there's a faith that may take that a bit too far, but not a bit, they take it too far, don't let that shy you away from being awed by numbers and being awed by the mathematical principles that stay constant through every different person's faith and every different person's religious views. That's another compass to lead a Buddhist or a Taoist or a Hindu back to the Lord, because math is constant all the way through that. And you can't really explain that without a single creator setting up the same physical nature in my body, the same symmetry, the same numerology that's in my human body, that is present all around me in the carbon data, in the DNA. This is all mathematical and should be revered. And we should be in awe of that. And that's not blasphemous. In fact, it's the opposite. I believe it's right or righteous to be in awe of nature, to be in awe of, let's think of secularism. That's a huge one today. People don't even realize they're practicing a faith by exhibiting secularism. The man or the woman who is all about building the company and getting that boat and getting the lake house, that is secularism. I'll also refer, that's more specifically materialism, both under the same religious umbrella. And those folks don't even call themselves, don't even think they're practicing a religion. Often you'll hear them say, I'm not religious, which is, I don't want to be mean, but that comment literally makes me want to laugh. I've learned not to. I've learned how to bite my tongue without people saying, but whenever I hear any human being saying, I'm not religious, especially an atheist or an agnostic, it is the most ironically, I'll just say wrong statement that a human being could utter out of his mouth in the English language. I don't think there's anything less informed than for any person to think that he is not practicing a religion. Even if an individual says, I'm not religious in the sense that I'm not Hindu, Buddhist, or any of these names I'm recalling, I'm just focused on getting my boat and taking care of my family and taking, not even the boat, but taking care of my family, taking care of the house, taking care of my business and growing my my establishment here on this world. That is materialism. That is secularism. That is an actual religion. These entities are my friends, not just entities, these humans, my friends, my brothers and sisters, are practicing a religion by pursuing the dollar, the success, the establishment of themselves and their patriarchy. Again, you'll find in all my commentary, I support patriarchy, but that's sub-important, what's less important, subordinate to the true patriarch, to be poetic, but the creator. The creator has to be the number one focus, and if your number one focus is the provision and the taking care of your family, that is materialism. That is secularism. Just a reminder, so no matter what, every human is practicing some type of faith. The term religion is bastardized. That's a difficult term to use because it's so misused, but different faith is a good way to put it. Their worldview, they're moving through life. They're implementing their daily routine. They're going to bed with something on their mind, waking up with something on their mind, like we talked about in the last podcast. Going to sleep, that was an audio podcast, by the way, on Spotify. Going to sleep with the Lord on your mind, waking up with the Lord on your mind, and going through your day that way is the recipe for success. That was a whole episode. You have to refer to that. I don't want to get on a tangent. So in contrast, to go to sleep with the success of my company on my mind solely, and to wake up with the success of my company on my mind solely, that is materialism. That is the faith of materialism. Practicing the faith of materialism, which I believe falls under secularism. I think there's a slight difference between the two, but for those purposes, I think they're interchangeable. So, without going on a tangent, let's get back to the text. These lights keep blinding me. I keep moving my eyes around to see the words. All right. So, the Lord's giving a reason why he has chosen 7 of the 7 pairs of the, what did he say, the clean animals? Yeah, clean animals. And 7 pairs of the birds of the sky. He says, because in 7 days I will send this, and there will be 40 days and 40 nights. I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I've made. Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Again, the Lord reiterates that. Noah did all that was commanded of him. That's the 3rd time he's repeated it in only 2 sentences. The 3rd time in verse 22 of chapter 6, he says it twice, and he says it a 3rd time in this verse. That's another important thing to point out from studying literature, any type of literature, studying the Holy Bible, studying Dante's trilogy, studying the Iliad, whatever it may be, is repetition. Especially with ancient traditional writers, repetition is everything. Repetition reiterates importance. The writer does not have to reiterate, this is an extremely important point, reader. All the author does is repeats it. And if it was repeated 3 times, we have videos exactly on that. I remember from a couple of years ago on Facebook Live. But if it's repeated twice, it is important. Pay attention. But if it is repeated 3 times, that is ultimate important and invoking the number 3, going back to the study of numbers. All that is deeply layered in here. It's difficult to blast through even a single verse because of all the depth. And I encourage each one of my friends, get excited, start digging into this. You will be amazed. Every agnostic friend and atheist friend of mine will be even more amazed. Every materialist friend, every secular friend will be even more amazed. So let that encourage you. The skeptic will be more amazed. I mean, that's how we got the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, all those, more than a trilogy. All that because Tolkien was a skeptic and an agnostic. And he dove into this and he was absolutely amazed at the layers, at the levels, the excitement could not be contained, that his brain just ran and created an Aslan and Ice Queen and whatever. I haven't seen the narrative forever, but that was, that was C.S. Lewis, because it first happened to C.S. Lewis. I think C.S. Lewis was the older one. He did Narnia, right? He created Narnia because he was so excited. Sorry to confuse the images. Tolkien, same thing. He was also an atheist, also an agnostic, approached it trying to debunk it, found all this excitement and created the Lord of the Rings, created Frodo and Gandalf and all that. So I didn't mean to mix the images. But because the same thing happened in C.S. Lewis's life and in J.R. Tolkien's life. One led the other. I think it's C.S. Lewis led J.R. Tolkien by saying, yes, indeed, this is a myth. Yes, indeed, it's a myth. It just so happens to be true. And that guy, Tolkien said, bull crap, I'm going to go disprove this. And he went and he was convinced. The story is he did not debunk it, because you can't. And he fell in love and created the whole narrative of Frodo and whatnot. After C.S. Lewis had done Narnia, or simultaneously, around the same time. Gorgeous story. I mean, I can't revisit that enough. I know I repeat that all the time, but that story for you, my neighbor, that happened within the last century, or century and a half. Now we're in 2026. That happened recently. That was like just listen to me, just your great granddaddy. I mean, literally, that's not too far away in the family tree of life. Not a 2,000-year-old example. It's a very modern example. So, to people that folks love. People love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe that aren't Christians. People love Lord of the Rings that aren't Christians. So, it's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. So the Lord repeats in verse 5, Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. Then Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives went with him, entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Verse 8, of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, there went into the ark to Noah by 2, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. So there, I believe, verse 8 and 9, the Lord's reiterating again, hey, I know I've already listed all these animals, but my children, humans, are slow. They're going to be skeptics. So I'm going to repeat it again. Again, we see repetition, inferring importance. Again, I'm going to repeat, I brought all the animals on the ark. So those later on in the year 1950 or 1850 or 2050 that want to say, oh, these kind didn't get on the ark, or oh, you couldn't fit dinosaurs, which is one I love to debunk because it takes about 30 seconds. All these notions, the Lord knew they were coming. That's why he's repeating himself, because he loves me and he loves you. That's why he's repeating it. He loves you. He understands you're going to be skeptical, and he loves you. So he's repeating it for those in the back, as we say. For all those in the back, Let me repeat that again. Brought in all the animals of every stinking kind, just for clarification. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And then in verse 9, he's reiterating that the animals went in, just on that day, went into Noah, as the Lord commanded Noah, meaning that the animals were instructed by their Creator instinctually. And because of Noah being commanded, that's the inference there, it's already repeated 3 times that Noah did what the Lord commanded. So that interaction made this phenomena where all these animals went onto the ark. Wild animals that can't be told where to go, all went onto the ark. That is a phenomena. That shouldn't be skipped over. That's a huge, awesome, amazing thing that Noah and his kiddos got to experience. Of course, his kiddos, Noah's 600, so his kiddos are like 500 or something. But years old, that's just wild. But they all went onto the ark. It came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the ark, came upon the earth. So he had 7 days to get them all settled down. It's a whole lot of animals. He's going around, I imagine, buckling hatches, getting the animals in their place, getting them fed their first big meal before the ruckus, because no one doesn't really know what's coming. So he's going to prep them. I know that, having a couple animals, sometimes there's a big meal because we're going to be out all day, or you don't know when dinner's going to come, or whatever. I can imagine all these things are happening. I'm speculating, but he had 7 days to buckle down the hatches, and then the flood waters came upon the earth. Not rain. Doesn't say rain. It says they came upon the earth. In the 600 year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 7th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open and the floodgates of the sky were opened. Wow. I did not realize it actually specifies an actual day. That's pretty impressive. The 600 year of Noah's life, on the 2nd month of that year. Then even specifies further, on the 7th day of that 2nd month of the 600 year of Noah. That's pretty impressive. I did not remember that specificity. That's pretty awesome that the Lord wants to be that specific for us. So it says, the 17th day, the fountains of the great deep. So what we discussed in other videos, the water that was in the core of the earth, truthful geological research shows that it was most likely a mile deep surrounding the core. You have your magma, you have your core, then inner core, inner crust, whatever. Then there's a mile deep of water, kind of like we would imagine a pool of oil in a specific area, sometimes deep. A mile is pretty stinking long. We don't have many places that deep. But it's like we have pools of fossil fuels under the ground. It's not that's not a far-fetched concept for us. So there's a pool of water that it's underground, so it's not like a swimming pool. It's not smooth, a solid mile. What is that, 4,000 some odd feet? It's not that exact. There's hills, it's smaller in some areas, but about a mile, give or take, on average, traversing in this spherical shaped, one of the layers of the earth, underneath 10 layers of surface bedrock, 10 layers of 10 miles, I said layers. So 1 mile of water covered by 10 miles of the earth's crust, the bedrock, what we walk on today, even the ground, got 10 miles of that. So this 1 mile burst through, 1 mile of water burst through 10 miles of bedrock, of earth crust. And so in doing so, it creates these incredible valleys we see today, like below the Atlantic Ocean, coming back over the other side of around under the Pacific Ocean. This incredible crevice. But then also, as it bursts out, it throws up all this bedrock, miles worth of bedrock up here to create mountains. We're talking about there's such a giant expulsion of water and ground, bedrock, that we can't even fit it into a Hollywood type scenario. There's no movie that ever, not even the Death Star blowing up a planet, fully encompasses what actually happened with that force of the water. It says the fountains of the deep burst. Let me read it exactly. The fountains of the great deep burst open. So the fountains of the great deep, that mile word, that's the fountain. The fountains of the great deep burst open, came through 10 miles of, give or take, in different areas it's going to be different, but on average about 10 miles worth of bedrock, throwing, just moving whole sections of the earth up to uplifts. So we have tectonic shifts now. I don't know that there were plates before, what we call tectonic plates. I think the tectonic plates were a result of this breaking. So now we have plates all over. Where it was solid, the earth, according to the geological record, would have been much more flat rather than cavernous and hilly the way it is today, with deep valleys and giant mountains like Mount Everest. It would have been much more even, just an original earth God created, much smoother. So then when you have this 1 mile of water burst out, first off, the smooth surface of the earth is going to shrink a little bit. And when that does, there's going to be uplifts and valleys. And automatically that alone is going to create more of a rocky surface to the earth versus its original, balloon-filled shape being very smooth. You're taking out a mile worth of water inside. A percentage might have only been 5% of the earth or 1% of the earth. But anything's going to restrict it a bit and create these valleys. So, right, you have a smooth balloon, then boom, take out a little bit. You have uplifts and you have valleys. And so now we have mountains. We have, I wish I could remember the name of the great crevice traversing the great oceans. But you have all these things. Then, so that alone is amazing. But then also, when it's bursting through that section that's creating the Great Valley is moved and catching up onto the uplifts. So not only are there uplifts, there's more sediment thrown onto the uplifts. So you have bigger mountains, so on. And in smaller cases, when this busts up, the big pieces are going to lay over, right? It's going to boom, create a mountain. Create a hill. But the smaller pieces, when they're shot out, they're going to have much more aerodynamic nature to them. They're going to be able to travel further rather than just falling over. They're going to keep going up. And our atmosphere, arguably, was most likely tighter, more like a terrarium. Again, the water coming up from the deep. They didn't even have rain yet. There was no such thing as rain. So these pieces of the bedrock are shooting up through the atmosphere that is much more close back then, maybe. Even if it wasn't, even if the ozone was still in the level it is now, the piece just kept on going. And once it got out of the atmosphere that was here, it's free and it's in space. And again, it's pushed out by the fountains of the deep coming up. So it's bedrock mixed with water. It blasts up there and hit space. So what's it going to do? It's going to freeze. We've established that. Secular scientists have established, go out in space, that water molecules attached to the bedrock is going to freeze. And you already know probably where I'm headed with that. Obviously, we see meteorites, the smaller versions hitting down. We see asteroids. We see these large pieces that aren't planets. They're just pieces floating around. And then sometimes catching back into the atmosphere, getting sucked back down, and coming down and hitting Earth again. And so now with our advanced science, we've gone and researched them. We said, there's water in here. There's H2O in this meteorite. I mean, check it. That's consensus. I'm not putting a theory out there. That's consensus. There's H2O. Our physical earthly molecule of water is in this random space meteorite that we thought came from unknown places. It has our earthly elements on it. And I believe, I need to find the study to substantiate this, so this is certainly something to double check me on. I believe they found organic matter in the meteorites. I believe there are fossils of organic, some type of biological, algae type, not bones of mammals, but algae type fossils. Anyway, it just all affirms that meteorite started here, and how did it get out there? That's kind of a tangent, but here in verse 11, I believe we have the answer to that tangent about meteorites. The fountains of the deep, the great deep, a mile deep of water, burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. So it burst open, and then you have, again, the earth had not experienced rain up until this point. We're skipping over that because we covered that in another video. But the terrarium-like atmosphere on the earth, where fungi and reptilian creatures and all these things grew very large, absolutely, that all reaffirms each other. Secular scientists, I believe it's consensus that the earth in its earlier periods, even though they're not going to use terms like Ante-Diluvian and post-Diluvian, in earlier times was more terrarium-like. I think that's how they would phrase it. But I believe there's a general consensus on that. But most importantly, the Lord tells us that that's the truth. Anyway, now we will read about rain. That's what I was trying to set up. So, verse 12, the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And I can feel like in parentheses, just like the Lord had told Noah. Verse 13, on the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth and the sons of Noah. Oh, sorry, these sons of Noah. I was like, and the sons of Noah. I thought that, no, being the sons of Noah, those three, and Noah's wife and the three wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps of the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, and all sorts of birds. So they went into the ark to Noah. Oh, yeah, now I'm repeating myself. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but let's keep going. So all the animals. So they went into the ark to Noah by two, and all flesh in which was the breath of life. Those that entered, made male and female, of all flesh, entered as God commanded them, and the Lord closed it behind him. I think it's just reiterating for a third time that they all went in there. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark, so that it rose above the earth. The flood came. Yeah, it doesn't say the rain. The flood came. But of course, when it burst open, water's going to fall, which we would call raining. But again, that was the first occurrence of it raining, and that raining happened after the floods came. The deep burst and the floods came. All right, we'll wrap it up with this. Yes, the floods came upon the earth 40 days, and the water increased. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. And so that just reiterates how much water there was. I think that's another reminder the Lord gives us due to the theory that would be presented later of local flooding. I believe that's a direct iteration that it covered everything, even 15 cubits higher than the highest mountain. Now, to put a cap on it, there's a little bit of a tangent there. Mountain is a word that is used when the burst open and mountains were created, I believe when the floodwaters came and everything's mixed around, only more and more sediment would gather there, and the mountains would get even higher. But initially, the floodwaters covered everything that was on the earth, which was originally kind of like a balloon, a smooth surface, got a bit hilly. When the mile of water came out, the water still even covered that. That's the important part. But anyway, love you all. We'll end it there. Hope that wasn't too much of a dredge. I'm going to fix this lighting so it won't be blinding me as much next time. All right. Love y'all. Holler at you next time.